Forbidden whispers. The night was cold, and the castle walls seemed to breathe with the wind. Shadows stretched long across the cobblestone paths, whispering secrets only the moon dared to hear. In the darkness, silence reigned, but it was never truly silent. There were soft murmurs, voices long buried by history, whispers that the church erased, and stories the kings pretended never existed. Medieval times were cloaked in a mask of holiness and virtue. At least that's what the sermons said. From the outside, it looked like an age of devotion, chivalry, and strict morality. But behind the wooden doors of chapels, beneath the tapestries of royal chambers, there existed a hidden world, a world of desire, a world of danger, a world so forbidden that even today, it makes hearts beat faster. Imagine a young woman, her face hidden beneath a veil. She walks quietly through the narrow corridors of an ancient castle. Her steps are silent, but her presence is loud enough to stir curiosity. Servants glance at her and whisper among themselves. Some say she is a maid of the church, pure and devoted. Others say, at night, she is no one's servant. She becomes a queen of her own sinful kingdom. In the Middle Ages, sex was called sin, but the deeper truth, it was everywhere. Behind the holy sermons, in the private chambers of monks, in the beds of kings and peasants alike. Kings grew bored of their queens and sought the warmth of chambermaids. Priests who preached purity secretly owned books written about forbidden pleasures. And even the most devout nuns sometimes wrote letters of longing that were never meant to be read aloud. Desire, in those days, was like a caged animal. It could be hidden, chained, and punished, but it never died. There are stories of secret rooms hidden behind cathedral walls, places where candles burned not for prayer but for passion. There are tales of noble women, men who were married off to old men they did not love, and how they found solace in the arms of knights sworn to protect their honour. And there are darker stories still, of power being traded through flesh, of punishment that turned into pleasure, of fear and lust intertwined like ivy on stone. They called it dangerous, they called it dirty, and perhaps it was, but for the people living in that age, it was also irresistible. There was a village not far from the castle. By day it seemed quiet, ordinary, but when the moon rose, women gathered in secret circles. They shared whispers of herbs that could stir desire. They passed charms said to bring dreams of the one you longed for. Some claimed these women were witches, working spells to seduce the men of the church. Others believed they were simply taking back the power that men tried to deny them. Even the royal court was not free from scandal. Hidden beneath the golden masks of power were secret lovers, messengers who delivered coded letters soaked in perfume, cloaked figures sneaking through gardens at night. A king who confessed his sins to a priest, only for the priest to fall victim to the same temptations. And through it all, the church tightened its grip, declaring every pleasure to be a step toward damnation. Yet the harder they tried to erase desire, the more it burned. Picture this, a grand banquet in a candlelit hall. Musicians play soft melodies, nobles laugh and drink wine. But beneath the table, hands brush against forbidden thighs, glances linger longer than they should. Every smile hides a story, every toast hides a secret. The Middle Ages were a paradox, a time of faith and fear, a time of saints and sinners, and when it came to love, lust, and the body, the line between purity and sin was always blurred. So why were these stories erased? Because power is fragile, because desire makes people uncontrollable, because the truth was too raw, too human to be written in the chronicles of kings. But even after centuries, the whispers remain. You can still feel them in the ruins of old castles, in the dimly lit corners of forgotten monasteries, in the fading ink of ancient letters locked away in libraries. Tonight you have heard just one whisper, a taste of what was hidden. There are countless more. Stories of seduction, betrayal, and forbidden love that shaped the very foundation of medieval life. And if you dare to listen, I'll take you deeper into this world. The hidden chambers. The castle slept under a sky heavy with clouds. Only the faint glow of a torch flickered in the hallway, throwing trembling shadows on the cold stone walls. Somewhere beyond those walls, behind a door that few dared to open, lay a room that did not exist on any map. It was called the Hidden Chamber. No servant spoke of it, no priest mentioned it, but everyone knew it was there. A place where the most powerful men and women of the court shed their crowns, their robes, and their masks. The chamber was draped in velvet so dark it swallowed the light. Heavy curtains muffled every sound, and the air carried the sweet, intoxicating scent of rare spices, cinnamon, myrrh, and something else no one could quite name. Candles burned low, their wax pooling like molten secrets. In the centre stood a chair carved from black oak, a throne not for ruling kingdoms, but for ruling desire. It is said that the queen herself would visit this room when the burden of the crown became too heavy. She would slip away from the royal feast, leaving her husband drunk and laughing with his nobles. Alone, she would enter the chamber, remove the jewelled crown from her head, and breathe. In that room, she was no longer a queen. She was simply a woman, hungry, lonely, and desperate to feel alive. But the queen was not the only one. Knights in shining armour, bound by vows of honour, came here to break them. Monks who swore chastity would arrive with trembling hands, whispering prayers before crossing the threshold. Even the king himself had his moments of weakness, bringing foreign courtesans as trophies of war. Here, titles meant nothing, only desire ruled. Outside these walls, the church preached that the body was a cage for the soul. Inside, the body became the key. There was one man who knew all the secrets of this place. He was neither noble nor holy, but he was trusted with the keep. Aes, they called him the keeper. He was silent, watchful, and invisible. He prepared the chamber, lit the candles, poured the wine. He never asked questions, yet he knew more than anyone. He saw who came and who went. He heard their sighs, their confessions, their shameful promises whispered in the dark. One night, the keeper witnessed something he would never forget. It was a stormy evening, and the castle roared with thunder. The queen entered the chamber, dressed not in royal silks, but in a simple gown. She wasn't alone. With her came a young woman, a maid from the royal household. Their eyes met in the dim candlelight, and without a word, they closed the door. What happened inside is a mystery that history never recorded, but the keeper swore he heard laughter, soft and unrestrained, the kind of laughter that only comes when fear melts into freedom. These were the moments that could never be spoken aloud, the kind that could ruin kingdoms. Beyond the castle, in the villages, desire wore a different face. Peasants lived harsh lives, bound to the land and the will of their lords. Yet even in the mud and misery, secret passions bloomed. Lovers met in barns and forests, risking everything for a single night together. A wrong glance, a stolen kiss, could mean death if discovered, but they did it anyway. And then there were the wandering healers, women accused of witchcraft. They knew the power of herbs that could spark warmth in a cold marriage or soothe the pain of forbidden longing. Some claimed they could make someone fall in love with a single touch of their potion. Others whispered they could end a life just as easily. For this they were feared, and for this they were desired. One such healer, known only as Isolde, lived at the edge of a forest. People said she was beautiful in a way that made men forget their vows. But she did not belong to any man. Knights and merchants came to her, begging for charms of love, for potions of passion. Some came for pleasure, others for power. Isolde gave them what they wanted, but always at a cost. There was a tale of a lord who came to her, desperate to win the heart of a young maiden. She gave him a vial of crimson liquid, warning him that love taken by force would never be pure. He ignored her, he drank it, and for one night he had what he wanted. But in the morning the maiden's eyes were empty. She never spoke again. Such stories travelled quietly from village to village, from tavern to tavern. People pretended to be shocked, but in their hearts they were curious. Because in truth, everyone in the Middle Ages, king, peasant, priest, lived under the same unspoken truth. The more something was forbidden, the more it was desired, and so the whispers grew louder. In every castle there was a hidden chamber. In every village there was an Isolde. In every church, behind the holy relics, there were confessions no one dared write down. Even the scriptures, copied by trembling monks, could not stop it. Even the fear of eternal damnation could not silence it. Desire was like water. It found a way through every crack, and the cracks were everywhere. The masked feast. There was a night that people still whispered about generations later. They called it the masked feast. It happened once a year, hidden from the eyes of the church, in a grand hall draped with silk so heavy it muted every sound. The entrance was guarded by men in black cloaks, their faces hidden, their swords sharp. Only those with a secret invitation could step inside. Everyone who entered wore a mask. Some were golden, some feathered, some grotesque and strange. No one knew who was who. That was the rule. A king could be standing beside a farmer, a nun could be dancing with a knight, a wife could brush her fingers across the lips of her husband's enemy, and neither would ever know. The hall glowed with candlelight. Tables overflowed with roasted meats, exotic fruits, and goblets of dark wine that stained the lips like blood. Music played, soft, haunting melodies that wrapped around the guests like invisible hands, guiding them into a world where names and sins were left at the door. At the centre of the room was a long table draped in crimson velvet. There were no thrones, no symbols of power, only the shared hum of anticipation. The feast was not about food, it was about hunger. A masked woman in a gown of silver lace glided through the room. She stopped beside a man dressed as a black raven. He said nothing. She said nothing. Their fingers touched, barely, like a spark. Then she turned and vanished into the shadows beyond the curtain. The raven followed. Behind the curtain was another chamber, hidden within the hidden. No one knew how many such chambers there were. Some said 7, others said endless. Each one revealed something different. In one, there were mirrors on every wall reflecting endless versions of the same moment. In another, the air smelled of roses and smoke, and silk ropes hung from the ceiling. The masked feast was not a single niche cut. It was a dream, a place where the rules of the outside world dissolved. And yet, it was dangerous. Because masks can hide faces, but they cannot hide the eyes. And in those eyes, glances burned hotter than any candle. One year, a masked man arrived, dressed all in white. He moved with the quiet grace of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Many believed he was a nobleman. Others whispered he was a priest who had abandoned his vows. He danced with a woman whose mask was shaped like a wolf. She laughed softly, but there was an edge to it. She led him into one of the secret chambers. Hours passed. When she returned, she was alone. No one saw the man in white again. The next morning, the castle was silent. The feast was over. The masks were gone. Everyone returned to their lives, pretending nothing had happened. But the whispers lingered. Who was the man in white? Why did he never leave? And why, months later, did the wolf-masked woman suddenly disappear from the kingdom? No one dared ask aloud. These feasts were not unique. Across Europe, in cities and courts, similar gatherings took place. Some called them bacchanals, borrowing from the old pagan gods. Others said they were rituals of rebellion, a way for people to taste freedom in a world ruled by rigid laws. For one night, a peasant could be a prince, a queen could be a common lover, a monk could be a man. But the price of such freedom was silence. No one spoke of what happened. Those who did often vanished. The church, of course, condemned these gatherings. They called them sinful, demonic, the work of the devil. But secretly, even some priests attended. How else could they know so much about what happened there? One chronicler dared to write of the feasts in his journal, describing how they blurred the line between holiness and sin. He called it the place where saints became sinners, and sinners found their salvation in the flesh. That journal was burned. The chronicler was never seen again, and yet the feasts continued, because desire is stronger than fear. Imagine the feeling of removing your mask at dawn, knowing you had touched someone you would never meet in the daylight, knowing that for one night you were truly free. Freedom like that can be addictive, so the masked women and men kept returning year after year, risking everything for the taste of the forbidden. Even now, if you stand in the ruins of certain castles, you can almost hear the faint echoes of music, the soft laughter hidden in the stone, and if you're very quiet, you might even hear the rustle of a mask falling to the floor. The monastery of silent desires, far beyond the noise of kingdoms, beyond the reach of kings and peasants alike, stood a monastery. It was carved into the side of a lonely mountain, surrounded by mist so thick it seemed to swallow sound. From the outside, it looked pure, holy, a place of prayer and discipline, untouched by the sins of the world. Pilgrims came from distant lands to seek blessings from the monks who lived there, believing them to be closer to God than any mortal could be. But the monastery had another name, whispered only in secret. They called it the House of Silent Desires. By day the monks copied sacred texts with trembling hands, their voices chanting prayers that echoed through the cold stone halls. By night, those same halls carried softer sounds, sighs hidden beneath heavy robes, confessions that could never be written down. The monastery's library was famous. It held ancient manuscripts, books from forbidden lands, pages that spoke of love not as sin, but as power. There was one book, bound in dark leather, that was said to describe pleasures so detailed it could make even the most devout monk sweat. One young monk, Brother Aurelian, was chosen to guard the library. He was pure, or at least he believed he was. He had taken vows of silence, fasting, and chastity. His life was meant to be free of temptation, but temptation has a way of finding even the most faithful. One night, while the others slept, Brother Aurelian unlocked the library. Candle in hand, he wandered between the shelves. That's when he saw it, an old, forgotten scroll tucked behind the Holy Scriptures. It was written in a language he barely understood, but the drawings were clear enough. Curved bodies, tangled limbs, faces painted with ecstasy. His hands trembled as he read. For the first time, he felt something stir inside him that no prayer could calm. The next evening he returned, and the night after that. Until he was no longer reading for curiosity, he was reading because he hungered. But he was not alone. There was a nun in the nearby convent who often visited the monastery, bringing offerings of bread and herbs. Her name was Celeste. She was quiet, with eyes that held secrets deeper than any prayer. One night, she too wandered into the library, searching for silence. Instead, she found Aurelian. They stood there, in the flickering candlelight, surrounded by books filled with forbidden knowledge. Neither spoke, but in that silence, something passed between them. A question, a promise. No one knows what truly happened that night. Some say they sat together, reading the scroll aloud, their voices trembling. Others say the scroll was never read again because its words came to life in the shadows of the library. After that night, Brother Aurelian changed. He prayed harder, longer, as if trying to bury something inside him. But the more he tried to suppress it, the more it grew. Celeste too changed. Her visits became more frequent. She brought rare herbs that the monks claimed were for healing, but some whispered they were for stirring the body in ways the soul could not resist. And soon, rumours spread. Monks who had lived without touch for decades began to have vivid dreams. Some woke up in the dark with tears on their faces, unable to explain why. Others were caught wandering the halls at night, whispering names that were not gods. The abbot, the leader of the monastery, tried to stop it. He burned the scrolls, locked the library, doubled the prayers. But desire is like smoke. It finds its way through the smallest cracks. There are letters from that time, hidden in archives, unsigned, that speak of rituals in the moonlight, and confessions whispered against warm skin. Some say the monks and nuns began meeting in secret caves beneath the mountain, claiming they were seeking a higher understanding of the divine through each other. The church, when it finally learned of the rumours, sent men to cleanse the monastery, but by the time they arrived, the mountain was silent. The monks were gone, the nuns vanished. The monastery was abandoned. Even now, travellers say the place feels alive. They speak of strange sounds at night, soft footsteps, a whisper of a chant that turns into something else, something unholy. And deep in the ruins of the library, some claim you can still find scraps of the scroll, edges burned but words lingering like a curse. The story of the monastery is a reminder of something the church tried to deny, that even the holiest places are not free from the most human of desires. Because you can lock away the body, you can silence the lips, but you cannot stop what lives in the heart. And so the House of Silent Desires became just another legend. Or maybe it still waits in the mountains for someone brave enough to open its doors again. The Queen's Secret Night. In a time when kingdoms were won with swords and lost with whispers, there lived a queen whose beauty was said to rival the dawn. She was young, graceful and silent, trained to smile even when her heart was breaking. Her husband, the king, was much older. He ruled with an iron fist and trusted no one. To him, the queen was not a wife but a symbol, a jewel to display at feasts, a womb to carry his heir. But the queen was not made of glass. She was flesh, warm and alive, and she longed for something the king would never give her: tenderness. Among the king's guards was a knight named Sir Renaud. He was sworn to protect the royal family, his loyalty sharper than any blade. But he was different from the other knights. He did not boast. He did not drink himself into oblivion after battle. He carried himself with quiet strength, his eyes soft even in armour. The queen noticed him the way a starving bird notices a crumb. It began with glances, small, fleeting. When he bowed to her in the great hall, his eyes lingered just a heartbeat too long. When she passed him in the gardens, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Then came the day of the tournament. The king loved to watch his knights fight for glory. He sat on his throne, surrounded by nobles, while the queen watched from her gilded chair. One by one the knights fell, until only Sir Renaud remained. He fought like a storm, and when he won, the king laughed and tossed him a gold chain as a reward. But it was not the gold Renaud wanted. His eyes lifted to the queen, and in that brief moment, the entire court vanished. That night, the queen could not sleep. She walked the empty halls, her silk gown whispering against the floor. Outside her chamber door, Renaud stood guard, his sword at his side. She paused. He lowered his gaze. "My queen," he said softly, "you should rest." "And if I cannot?" she replied. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, he saw not a queen, but a lonely woman. What happened next was inevitable. He followed her into the chamber. The room was lit by a single candle. Shadows danced along the walls as she removed the heavy crown from her head. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper, something she had buried for too long. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Then leave," she said, but he didn't. The kiss was soft at first, almost unsure, but once it began, it could not be stopped. That night, the queen felt more alive than she ever had. No titles, no throne, just two souls meeting in a place beyond duty and law. But love like this could not stay hidden forever. The king was no fool. He noticed the way his wife's eyes sparkled differently, the way Renaud grew quieter in his presence. Suspicion is a dangerous seed. It grows fast, even in the coldest hearts. One evening, the king summoned Renaud to the great hall. "You have served me well," the king said, his voice calm but sharp. "So well, in fact, that I fear you have forgotten your place." Renaud knelt, saying nothing. "Tell me," the king continued, "do you love your queen?" Renaud did not lie. "Yes," he said. Silence fell over the hall like a blade. The king smiled, a cruel, thin smile. "Then you shall prove it." The next day, the queen watched from her window as Renaud was led to the courtyard in chains. He was stripped of his armour and tied to a stake. The king announced his punishment before the entire court, death by fire for betraying the crown. But Renaud did not beg. He looked up at the queen one last time, his eyes calm, and mouthed a single word: "Live." The flames consumed him before anyone could blink. That night the queen did not cry. She stood before the mirror, removed her crown, and whispered his name like a prayer. Weeks later the king grew ill. Some say it was poison in his wine. Others say it was the weight of his own cruelty. When he died, the queen ruled alone. She never remarried, but in her private chamber, hidden behind a tapestry, she kept a single piece of Renaud's armour, a small fragment of the man she had loved more than her throne. And though the kingdom moved on, the legend of the queen and her knight lived on in songs and hushed voices. Because love in the Middle Ages was not always gentle. Sometimes it was dangerous, sometimes it cost everything, but it was always unforgettable. The Tavern of Midnight Deals, in the heart of an old city, where narrow streets twisted like veins and the air smelled of smoke and damp stone, there stood a tavern. By day, it was loud and crowded, merchants shouting over their cups, travellers exchanging stories, laughter spilling onto the cobblestones. But after midnight, the tavern changed. The lamps burned lower, the laughter faded, and a different kind of crowd arrived. They called it the Midnight Place. It was where secrets were traded like coins, where whispers could buy you more than gold ever could. Behind the tavern's heavy wooden door was a hidden room, lit by a single red lantern. No one who entered that room came out the same. The woman who owned the tavern was known only as Mirabelle. No one knew where she came from. Some said she was a noblewoman who'd fallen from grace. Others claimed she was a witch who had made a pact with the devil himself. Mirabelle was beautiful, but not in the way of courtly ladies. She had a raw, dangerous beauty, the kind that made men forget their vows and women question their own desires. Her eyes saw through everything, your lies, your fears, your hunger. She offered more than wine. Travellers spoke of her potions, mixed in secret. A drop could make you fearless. A sip could make you forget. And there were other things too. Powders and charms that stirred the blood and set fire to even the coldest hearts. But it wasn't just her potions that drew people. It was the room beyond the door. They said it was a place where you could be anyone. A beggar could be treated like a king. A widow could feel young again. A priest could confess sins no one else would ever hear. One stormy night, a nobleman entered the tavern, his cloak dripping with rain. His face was hidden, but everyone could see the gold rings on his fingers. He followed Mirabelle through the back door, past the barrels of all to the red-lit room. Inside, masks hung on the walls, silk, leather, porcelain. She told him to choose one. "Why?" he asked. "Because here," she said, "you must leave yourself behind." He put on a mask shaped like a fox. She smiled and opened another door. What lay beyond it, no one could say. Some who went in spoke of a place filled with music that seemed to come from nowhere, of dancers whose faces were hidden, of soft hands guiding them through the dark. Others said it was a dream you could touch, a place where your deepest longing came alive, just for a moment. But not everyone came out whole. There were stories of men who returned pale and silent, as if they had seen something they could not speak of. A few never returned at all. One woman, a merchant's wife, entered the room one night wearing a mask of gold. She was seen laughing, radiant, as if she'd found the love she'd been searching for. But the next morning, she was gone. Her husband searched for months, but her name was never spoken again. Mirabelle never explained. She only smiled and poured more wine. They said she knew the true desires of anyone who crossed her path. She would give you exactly what you craved, but always at a cost. One priest, torn between his faith and his forbidden urges, came to her. He begged for a potion to silence his thoughts. Mirabelle gave it to him. For a week, he felt nothing. No temptation, no longing. But then he stopped feeling anything at all. No joy, no sorrow, just emptiness. When he returned asking for the cure, Mirabelle simply said, "You asked to be free. Freedom is never what you think it is." And so the tavern remained. It survived plagues, wars, even the wrath of the church. Because no matter how much the world changed, people still wanted the same things: to escape, to feel, to be touched by something real, even if it was dangerous. If you walk through certain old cities at midnight, you might still find it. A faint glow in an alley, a door that shouldn't be there, and behind it, the soft sound of music and the scent of wine mixed with something sweeter, something darker. But if you go in, remember this: Mirabelle gives, but she also takes, and what you leave behind in the midnight place may never return to you. The alchemist's lover. In the corner of an ancient city, where narrow alleys smelled of ink and smoke, there lived an alchemist. His name was lost to time, but his work was whispered about in hushed tones. He was said to turn base metals into gold, to create powders that healed the sick and elixirs that awakened other things. By day he appeared harmless, just a scholar bent over dusty books, grinding herbs and minerals. By night his small workshop glowed with strange light, and the air trembled with scents no one could name. People came to him for many reasons. Some wanted fortune, others wanted power. But the ones who came after dark wanted something more intimate. They wanted desire. The alchemist was not young, but he was not old either. He had a face marked by solitude, eyes that had seen too much. He believed love was nothing but a distraction, a chemical trick of the body, until she arrived. Her name was Leora. She came to him one rainy evening, her cloak dripping, her lips pale. She was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like a candle burning too close to silk. "I heard," she said softly, "that you can create feelings." The alchemist studied her carefully. "Feelings cannot be created," he said, "only revealed." She stepped closer. "Then reveal mine." So he did what he had never done for anyone before. He led her into the deepest part of his workshop, where shelves of strange jars lined the walls. He took a vial of shimmering liquid, clear as water but glowing faintly like a star trapped in glass. "This will show you your truest desire," he warned. "But once you drink, you cannot unsee it." Leora didn't hesitate. She sipped the elixir, and her eyes fluttered shut. When she opened them, she didn't look away from him. "What do you see?" he asked. "You," she whispered. And with that single word, the alchemist's world cracked. He tried to resist. He told himself, "Elf, it was the potion speaking, not her heart." But when she touched his hand, something inside him, something buried under years of cold reason, woke up. Their nights together became a secret experiment of their own. She would visit, slipping through the shadows, and he would show her wonders no one else had seen. Powders that glowed like moonlight on skin, perfumes that lingered like memories, herbs that made the air heavy with longing. But their love was not safe. The city's bishop had long been suspicious of the alchemist, calling his work unholy. When whispers spread that a nobleman's wife had also visited him for a cure for her loneliness, the bishop saw his chance. One evening, soldiers burst into the workshop. They found the alchemist alone, surrounded by his forbidden creations. They burned his books, smashed his glass vials, and dragged him to the cathedral to face judgment. But Leora was gone. Some said she fled the city. Others said the bishop took her for himself. No one truly knew. The alchemist was sentenced to death for heresy. Before he was led to the pyre, he was given one chance to confess. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out a tiny vial of the same shimmering elixir. Without a word, he drank it. Witnesses claimed he smiled as the flames rose, as if he saw something, someone, waiting for him on the other side. After his death, strange things happened. Lovers in the city began finding each other in dreams. Couples who drank from the same cup would see visions of each other's desires. Some swore they smelled a faint trace of his potions in the night air, as if the alchemist's work had seeped into the very stones of the city. And sometimes, on quiet nights, travellers say they see a woman in a rain-soaked cloak walking the alleys, searching for a door that no longer exists. They say she is still looking for him, because some loves are not bound by time, and some desires never burn out even in the fire. The Duchess and the Painted Room. In a grand estate beyond the city walls lived a duchess known for her grace and her silence. Her husband, the Duke, was a man of politics and power. He spent more time in court than at home, leaving her alone in the echoing halls of their mansion. The servants whispered that she wandered those halls like a ghost. She dressed in silks, dined on gold plates, yet her eyes always looked far away, as if searching for something that wasn't there. One afternoon, while exploring the oldest wing of the estate, she discovered a locked door hidden behind a faded tapestry. The key was still in the lock, rusted but waiting. When she opened it, she found the Painted Room. It was unlike anything else in the mansion. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with murals, bodies entwined in secret embraces, scenes of pleasure so vivid they seemed to move in the candlelight. She stood there frozen, her cheeks flushed, her breath shallow. Who had painted it? When? And why had it been sealed away? In the centre of the room was a single chair, carved with intricate patterns, as if it had been made for someone to sit and watch. That night she couldn't sleep. The images burned in her mind. She told herself it was wrong, shameful, a trick of the past. But the next evening she returned, and the evening after that. The more she stared at the paintings, the more she began to feel them. It was as if the room was alive, whispering to her, awakening something inside her she had long buried beneath layers of duty and cold, empty nights. But the painted room didn't just awaken desire, it awakened memories. She began to dream of a man she had never met. Dark hair, strong hands, a face she couldn't place. In her dreams, he stood beside her in the painted room, touching her gently, as if he had been waiting for her all along. And then one night, she wasn't dreaming. He entered the room, and he was there. He looked exactly as he did in her visions. He smiled softly, as if he knew her. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who was lost," he replied, "and someone who found you." He stepped closer, and the air grew heavy. She should have screamed, should have fled, but she didn't. His hand brushed hers, and every nerve in her body came alive. They met in secret, night after night. Sometimes it felt real, solid, like flesh and blood. Other times it felt like slipping into a dream. She never knew which it was, and she didn't care. But secrets do not stay hidden forever. The Duke returned from court earlier than expected. He noticed her glow, the way her eyes no longer seemed so distant. Suspicion gnawed at him. One night, he followed her. He watched from the doorway as she stood in the painted room, her arms wrapped around. No one. She was alone, but her lips were parted in a soft sigh, her eyes half closed, as if she were in the arms of a ghost. The Duke was furious. He believed she had gone mad. He ordered the room sealed again, this time with bricks. He locked her in her chambers, forbidding her from leaving. But she refused to eat, refused to speak, and one morning she was simply gone. Some say she wasted away, her soul slipping into the painted room to join the man she loved. Others believe she escaped in the night, vanishing into the woods. But there are rumours. If you ever find yourself in an abandoned mansion, in a room hidden behind a tapestry, and you see murals that seem to move, do not stay too long, because the painted room remembers, and if it chooses you, it will never let you go. The pilgrim's temptation. The road to the holy city was long and cruel. Dust clung to every traveller's cloak, and the sun burned mercilessly over their bowed heads. Pilgrims walked it seeking redemption, mothers praying for their children, warriors seeking forgiveness for bloodshed, lovers hoping for a miracle to reunite them. Among these weary souls was a man named Thomas. He was young, strong and quiet, his eyes shadowed with guilt he never spoke of. He carried only a small satchel and a vow to reach the holy shrine and cleanse himself of the sin that haunted him. For days he walked alone, until he reached an inn by the roadside. It was small, humble, with wooden beams that creaked under the weight of time, but there was something strange about it. Lanterns glowed too warmly, and a soft melody floated from inside, even though no musician was seen. The innkeeper was a woman with hair black as midnight, and a smile that seemed to know secrets Thomas had never told. "You look tired," she said. Her voice was soft, but it lingered in the air like incense. "Rest here, the road will be kinder tomorrow." Thomas hesitated. He was on a holy journey. Temptation was to be avoided, but his feet ached, and the warmth of the inn was too inviting. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of wine, and something sweeter, something he couldn't name. A few travellers sat at tables, but their faces were turned away, their voices low. The innkeeper led Thomas to a small room lit by a single candle. "Sleep well," she said, her hand brushing his arm just slightly, too slightly, to be an accident. But Thomas could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint music that seemed to drift from nowhere, and then he heard footsteps. The door creaked open. She stood there in the candlelight, the innkeeper, her dark hair falling over her shoulders like silk. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Thomas should have turned away. He should have remembered his vow, but something in her eyes held him captive, as if she could see straight through him, to the desire he had buried beneath layers of guilt. She stepped closer. And in that moment, the holy road, the shrine, the vow, none of it mattered. Only the heat of her breath, the softness of her hands, the way the world seemed to dissolve around them. The night stretched on like a dream, but when he woke, the bed was empty, the inn was silent. He rushed outside, but the building was gone. In its place was an empty field, the grass untouched, as if no inn had ever stood there. Thomas stumbled to the nearest village, confused and shaken. When he asked about the inn, the villagers exchanged nervous glances. "You saw her," they whispered. "The lady of the road." They told him the story. Long ago, a woman named Celine had waited for her lover to return from pilgrimage, but he never came. She died of grief, and her spirit lingered, calling to lonely travellers who passed by. They said she would give you one night of perfect, unforgettable desire, but the price was heavy. From that day forward, no traveller who met her would ever reach the holy city. Thomas never finished his pilgrimage. They say he still wanders the road, searching for the inn that vanished, hoping to see her again. And some nights, pilgrims swear they glimpse a lone figure in the distance, standing by a lantern's glow, waiting for someone who cannot resist her call. The Witch's Mirror. Deep within the forest, where the trees grew so close they choked out the sun, there was a cottage that no villager dared to approach. Smoke curled from its crooked chimney, carrying a scent of herbs and ash. Birds never sang near it. It was the home of a woman they called a witch. Her name was Seraphine. She was neither young nor old, beautiful nor ugly. She was simply striking. Her eyes were green like the moss on the forest floor, and her voice was soft but heavy, like the hush before a storm. Villagers came to her only in desperation, a wife whose husband strayed, a man whose heart longed for someone beyond his reach, a girl who wished to know if the boy she dreamed of would ever return her love. Seraphine always listened, and she always offered the same thing, a look into the mirror. It was said the mirror did not show your face, it showed your true desire. But there was a warning. "Once you look," Seraphine whispered, "you will never be free of what you see." Most ignored her warning. One day, a nobleman came to the forest. He was proud, handsome, used to having whatever he wanted, but there was one woman he could not have, the queen herself. He wanted her so badly it drove him mad. Seraphine brought him to the mirror. It was tall and framed in twisted silver, its surface dark like a pool of still water. "Show me the queen," he demanded. The mirror shimmered, and there she was, not the queen as he saw her in court, but in a secret chamber, her hair undone, her skin bare, waiting for someone, waiting for him. He fell to his knees. "Tell me how to make it real," he begged. Seraphine gave him a potion. "But remember," she warned, "desire taken is never the same as desire freely given." He did not listen. The potion worked. For one night the queen looked at him as if he were the only man in the world. He touched her, kissed her, believed she truly wanted him. But the next morning her eyes were empty. She did not speak, she did not move. She was like a doll, breathing but hollow. The nobleman returned to Seraphine in rage. "You tricked me," he cried. "She feels nothing." Seraphine's green eyes did not blink. "You asked for what you desired," she said, "not for love." Consumed by guilt, the nobleman disappeared. Some say he wandered into the forest and never came out. Others say he broke the mirror in anger. But when he did, he saw his own reflection staring back, twisted with longing he could never satisfy. And still the villagers came, one by one, asking the same questions. A lonely wife looked and saw her husband's best friend. A young maiden looked and saw another maiden's smile. A priest looked and saw not God, but the soft touch of a stranger. Some left in tears, others left in silence, but none left unchanged. The mirror never lied. Over the years, the villagers began to fear it. They stopped coming. They whispered that Seraphine was cursed, that the forest itself belonged to her dark magic. But the truth was simpler. She had only given them what they already carried inside. And if you wander that forest even now, you might find the cottage still standing. You might hear a soft voice calling you closer. And if you dare to step inside, you will see the mirror waiting for you. But remember, once it shows you your truest desire, you can never pretend you don't know it. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing is not the mirror itself. It's the reflection you cannot look away from. The Song of the Siren Courtesan. In the bustling heart of a medieval port city, where ships from distant lands brought silk, spices, and secrets, there was a house unlike any other. By day it seemed quiet, unremarkable. But at night, when the moon hung low over the harbour, soft music drifted from its windows like a spell. This was the House of the Siren. No one knew her real name. She was simply called the Siren Courtesan. They said her voice could stop a man in his tracks. When she sang, the air seemed to grow heavier, warmer, and every thought except her melted away. Sailors risked their wages just to hear one verse. Nobles abandoned their feasts to sit in her presence. Even priests slipped into the shadows of the harbour, desperate for one moment in her company. But the siren was not like other women of the night. She chose who could see her. If she did not want you, the door stayed closed, no matter how much gold you offered. One winter, a young knight returned from war. His name was Adrian. He was strong, loyal, but lonely. The songs of the siren reached even his ears, carried on the salty wind of the docks. His friends warned him. "She will ruin you," they said. "Men who fall for her never return the same." But Adrian went anyway. The house of the siren glowed with lantern light. Inside, the air smelled of roses and wine. And there she was, seated on a low cushion, her hair dark as the sea, her eyes catching every flicker of light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She began to sing. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper at first. Then it grew, wrapping around Adrian like silk. The song told a story of longing, of nights waiting for someone who never came. It was beautiful and sad, like the cry of a gull lost in the fog. Adrian forgot why he had come. He forgot the years of battle, the weight of his sword, the vows he had taken. There was only her voice. When the song ended, she looked at him and smiled, a smile that felt both kind and cruel. "Stay," she said, and so he stayed. The nights that followed were unlike anything he had known. She showed him pleasures that felt almost unreal, whispers that made his blood burn and his heart ache, but she never let him close enough to know her. Every time he thought he understood her, she pulled away like the tide. He began to crave her voice more than food, more than sleep. When she sang for others, jealousy twisted inside him like a blade. But the siren courtesan had a rule: no one could love her. One night, Adrian couldn't bear it anymore. "Come away with me," he pleaded. "Leave this place. Be mine." Her smile faded. "You don't understand," she said. "I can't leave. I belong to the song." And then she sang again. But this time, the song was different. It was deeper, darker, like the ocean before a storm. As she sang, Adrian felt his strength draining, his breath growing shallow. The next morning, he was found outside the harbour, alive but hollow. He never spoke again. Some say the siren song took a piece of his soul, others say he gave it willingly, and still the house of the siren remained. Men came and went, each leaving a little more lost than before. No one truly knew who she was or where she came from. Some whispered she was cursed, a woman who had once loved too deeply and was bound forever to sing her sorrow. Others believed she was not human at all. Even today, sailors say that on quiet nights, when the sea is calm and the moon is full, you can still hear her voice drifting across the water, soft, sweet, calling someone to come closer. But if you follow it, you may never return the same. Because the siren courtesan gives you everything you think you want, and takes everything you didn't know you'd lose. The forbidden garden, beyond the high walls of an ancient monastery, hidden from the eyes of peasants and kings alike, there was a garden unlike any other. It was said to be planted by a forgotten order of monks who believed the path to enlightenment was not through denial, but through surrender. By day, the garden seemed harmless. It was full of rare flowers, strange vines, and fruits so ripe they glistened like jewels. But by night, it changed. The air grew heavy, thick with scents that stirred something deep inside the soul. Few ever saw it, because the garden was kept locked. Only the abbess held the key. She was a quiet woman named Isolde, devoted to her faith, or so everyone thought. But Isolde knew the truth of the garden. It was no ordinary place. It was a relic of an older time, before the church claimed power, when love and pleasure were seen as sacred, not sinful. One evening, a young scribe named Elias arrived at the monastery. He had been sent to copy holy texts, a quiet, obedient task. But Elias was curious, more curious than he should have been. While the others prayed, he wandered, and one night he saw the garden gates open. The moonlight poured through like silver water, illuminating the path beyond. Drawn by a force he couldn't name, he stepped inside. The air was warm, fragrant. Strange flowers brushed his skin as he walked, their petals soft as whispers. He felt lighter. The weight of his vows, his guilt, his fear, all of it seemed to melt away. At the centre of the garden was a pool shimmering in the moonlight, and beside it stood Abbess Isolde. She was not dressed in her usual plain robes. Her hair was loose, her face soft and unguarded. She looked at him not as an abbess, not as a holy woman, but as a woman. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice held no anger. "Then why is the door open?" Elias asked. She smiled. "Because the garden sea Whose is?" She offered him a fruit from one of the trees. It was dark red, glistening, and when he bit into it, the taste was unlike anything he had known, sweet, rich, almost intoxicating. And then, the garden came alive. The flowers seemed to move, curling toward him. The air grew warmer, pulsing with some hidden rhythm, and when Isolde touched his hand, every sense in his body awakened. That night, the garden showed him things beyond words, pleasures that felt holy and forbidden at the same time, secrets of the flesh that seemed to reach beyond the flesh itself. But the garden was not only a giver, it was also a taker. When dawn came, Elias woke outside the gates. The garden was locked once more. The scent of its flowers lingered on his skin, but something inside him had changed. He could not return to his old life. He tried to pray, but the prayers felt empty. He tried to forget, but the memory of the garden burned in his mind like a brand. And so he wandered back to the monastery gates, begging Isolde to let him in again. She only shook her head. The garden shows itself only once. If you enter again, you may never return. But Elias didn't care. He chose the garden. No one ever saw him after that night. The monks whispered that the garden devoured him. Others believed he became part of it, another bloom in its eternal mystery, and still the garden waits. Hidden behind stone walls, sealed by keys no one dares to use, it waits for the one it will choose next. If you ever feel a sudden scent of strange flowers in the air, sweeter than anything you've known, be careful. It might be calling you. The Masked Feast. Once a year, when the harvest moon rose fat and red over the hills, a strange celebration was held at the edge of a forgotten town. It was called the Feast of Veils. No one knew who organized it, no one was invited, you simply found it. Or rather, it found you. It was said that if you wandered the woods on that night, you would hear distant music, flutes and soft drums carried on the wind. If you followed the sound, it would lead you to a clearing lit by hundreds of candles, and there you would see them. Men and women dressed in the finest silks and velvets, but every face hidden behind a mask. Foxes, ravens, wolves and doves, each mask delicate and beautiful, covering every feature. They danced in pairs and circles, moving with a grace that seemed almost inhuman. And as you watched, someone would notice you. Someone in a mask would reach out a gloved hand and whisper, "Welcome." Once you stepped into the circle, there was no turning back. The feast began. Long tables groaned under the weight of food, ripe fruits dripping with juice, meat spiced with flavors unknown to any kitchen, goblets of wine dark as blood. But more intoxicating than the food was the air itself. It felt alive, heavy with music and something more. Something that made your heart beat faster, your thoughts blur. No one spoke their real names. No one asked questions. The masks erased who you were. There was no lord or servant, no wife or stranger, only desire. Some danced, some disappeared into the candlelit shadows, some sat silently, just watching as others gave in. But there was one rule. At midnight, the masks could not be removed. Because the feast was not only for humans, it was said that among the dancers were those who were not entirely of this world, beings of shadow and light drawn to the desires of mortals. If you removed a mask, you might see a face that was not a face at all. Eyes too bright, skin too pale, a smile too sharp. But in that moment, it wouldn't matter. There was a story of a young bride who stumbled upon the feast on the night before her wedding. She wore a mask shaped like a swan. A man in a silver wolf mask asked her to dance. They danced all night. When dawn came, she woke in her bed at home, still in her wedding gown. But her fiancé waited in the chapel, and she could not face him, because she couldn't remember the wolf-masked man's name, or if he was a man at all. Another tale spoke of a monk who came to the woods to pray for the souls of those who sinned. He too found the feast. He tried to resist, but the music was too sweet, the masked figures too beautiful. He drank the wine, tasted the fruit, touched the hands of strangers. When he returned to his monastery, his face was pale, his lips silent. He never spoke another word, only carved endless drawings of masks into the stone walls of his cell. And so the Feast of Veils remained a mystery. Some called it a trap for the weak. Others believed it was a gift, a night where you could live your deepest longing without shame. But everyone agreed on one thing. If you hear music in the woods when the harvest moon is high, you should turn back, because the feast will give you what you desire most, and it will never let you forget. The widow's candle. In a quiet village, far from the noise of castles and courts, there was a widow who lived alone. Her name was Althea. She was young when her husband died in battle, leaving her with an empty house and an emptier heart. The villagers pitied her at first, but as the years passed, pity turned to whispers. She was too beautiful to remain alone, too quiet, too mysterious. Some said she wandered the woods at night, speaking to shadows. Others claimed she lit a single candle in her window every full moon, and men who saw it could not resist coming to her door. It was true. The candle was no ordinary candle. Althea had learned its secret from her grandmother, who had been called a healer and a witch. The candle was made from beeswax, herbs, and something more, something whispered into it with a breath that wasn't entirely human. When lit, it glowed with a soft golden light, but the flame didn't just illuminate the room, it illuminated desire. One evening, a merchant stopped in the village, tired from travel. He was a decent man, loyal to his wife, but when he passed Althea's house, he saw the candle flickering in the window. He meant to keep walking, but his steps slowed. The light drew him closer, like a moth to fire. He knocked on her door. She opened it, her face calm, her eyes like deep water. She didn't speak, she only stepped aside and let him in. The house smelled of flowers and rain. The candle burned on the table, its light soft and strange, and suddenly the merchant couldn't remember why he had been hurrying home, couldn't remember his wife's face, couldn't remember anything except the way Althea's hand felt when it touched his. The night passed like a dream. When dawn came, the candle burned out. The merchant woke in his own bed at the inn, his clothes neatly folded beside him. He told himself it was only a dream, but when he returned home, his wife noticed something different, a distance in his eyes, a silence in his heart. He never spoke of it, and he was not the only one. A farmer, a soldier, a nobleman travelling in disguise. They all saw the candlelight. They all knocked on her door, but none stayed, because the candle gave only one night. Althea never asked for love. She never demanded promises. She gave them what they longed for most in the moment they saw the flame, and then she let them go. But there was one man who refused to leave. He was a hunter from another village. He saw the candle, entered her home, and after that night, he could not bear the thought of living without her. "Blow out the candle," he begged. "Let me love you without it." But Althea only shook her head. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The candle shows you what you want. Without it, you may not want me at all." The hunter swore he would, but when she finally blew out the flame, his eyes changed. He saw the simple house, the plain walls, the loneliness she carried, and he left. Althea never lit the candle again. The villagers said she grew old in that house, always waiting for someone who would love her without the magic of the flame. And on the night she died, they say the candle flickered one last time in the window, burning with a light so bright it could be seen from the edge of the forest. Now, on certain nights, travellers passing through the village still claim to see it, a faint golden glow in the window of an empty house. But those who knock on the door never return the same. The ink of desire. In the scriptorium of a great monastery, monks spent their days hunched over parchment, copying sacred texts by candlelight. Their world was silent, but for the scratch of quills and the faint echo of prayers. Among them was a monk named Lucian. He was quiet, devoted, with hands as steady as a surgeon's. But unlike the others, Lucian had a secret curiosity. He was drawn not only to Holy Scripture, but to the hidden stories buried in forbidden books locked deep in the abbey's library. One evening, while searching through a chest of forgotten manuscripts, he found something unusual, a vial of ink. It shimmered faintly in the lamplight, dark but alive, as if tiny stars were trapped within it. Attached to it was a small scrap of parchment with a single line written in an elegant hand, "Write what you desire, and it shall come." Lucien stared at it for a long time. At first he resisted. It was surely temptation, surely a trick. He locked the vial away. But at night, when the other monks slept, he couldn't stop thinking about it. And so, one night, he gave in. He dipped his quill into the shimmering ink and began to write. Not a prayer, but a vision. He wrote of a woman. Not any woman he had seen, but one he imagined, one who existed only in the soft corners of his thoughts. Her hair was like gold in the sun. Her eyes were gentle but full of longing. As the words flowed, he felt the air grow warmer, heavier. When he finished, he set down the quill and closed his eyes. And then he heard a soft breath behind him. When he turned, she was there, exactly as he had written. She smiled, her lips parting as if she had always known him. She touched his cheek, and his heart pounded like a drum. They said monks took vows of silence, but that night there was no silence, only whispers, only the sound of the quill falling to the floor. The next morning, she was gone, but the memory of her lingered like a perfume that wouldn't fade. Lucien told himself it was a dream, yet he couldn't stop. Night after night, he dipped the quill into the shimmering ink and wrote again. Sometimes it was the same woman, sometimes it was another, each one born of a thought he barely dared to name, and each time they came to him. But with every vision he summoned, something changed. The ink in the vial never ran out, but his reflection in the polished brass of the scriptorium grew paler. His hands trembled more, his eyes hollowed. And one night, when he tried to write again, the words wouldn't come. The ink moved on its own. It began to write without him, curling into strange symbols, beautiful and unreadable. From the shadows of the room, he heard voices whispering, not one, but many, like a chorus of soft, endless sighs. And then she appeared again. But this time, her face was wrong. Her eyes too dark, her smile too sharp, her touch too cold. "You asked for us," she whispered. "Now you cannot unwrite us." The next morning, the monks found the scriptorium empty. Lucien was gone. On his desk lay a single parchment. It was blank, except for a faint shimmer, like the ghost of words that had been written and then erased. After that, no one dared to open the forbidden chest. No one touched the vial of ink. But sometimes, late at night, the youngest monks claimed they could hear the faint scratch of a quill, even when the room was empty. And if you looked too long at the old manuscripts in the abbey's library, you might see something hidden between the lines. A shape, a name, a face you didn't expect. Because words, once written in that ink, never truly disappear. They wait. The Velvet Chamber, in the royal palace, beyond the grand halls and endless corridors, there was a door no servant dared to open. It was covered in deep crimson velvet, soft to the touch, yet heavy with silence. There were no guards, no locks, no warnings, only the knowledge that whoever entered would not return the same. The king called it the Chamber of Rest, but the courtiers whispered another name, the Velvet Chamber. It was said that within its walls, the queen herself had disappeared. The story began long before the current king, when an earlier monarch built the chamber for his young bride. She was beautiful but distant, her smile always tinged with sorrow. She could not give him the love he craved, and so he sought the help of an alchemist, who crafted a room that would awaken the sleeping heart. No one knew what was inside. But the queen entered it one evening at her husband's command. She was seen stepping through the velvet door with quiet resignation, and she never came out. The next morning, the king found her waiting in her chambers, but she was changed. Her eyes glowed softly, her voice carried a warmth it had never held. She smiled at him as if he was the only man in the world. For months, they were inseparable, but whispers spread. The queen seemed too perfect, too devoted, too endlessly eager to please. And then, one night, she vanished. No one saw her leave. The king searched the palace, the gardens, even the dungeons. At last, he opened the velvet chamber. The room was empty, but on the velvet walls were faint handprints pressed deep into the fabric as if someone had clung to it in ecstasy or in fear. Since then, the chamber remained. Years passed, new kings rose, the door stayed closed. Until one day, a new queen arrived. She was young, full of spirit, but the court whispered she did not truly love her husband. The king, desperate to bind her, Art was told the old legend. He was told of the room that could awaken love, and so, once again, the velvet door opened. The queen stepped inside. When she emerged, she was transformed. Her laughter filled the palace, her eyes burned with passion, and the king believed the chamber had worked. But there was a cost. At night, she woke screaming from dreams she could not describe. She began to wander the palace in silence, touching the walls as if searching for something unseen. Servants swore they heard whispers following her, soft and hungry. One evening, she went back to the chamber on her own, and she did not return. The king waited outside, but the door never opened. When he finally dared to enter, the room was empty again, except for the faint scent of her perfume and new handprints pressed into the velvet. Now the chamber waits, as it always has. No one knows what truly lies beyond its walls. Some say it's a room where desire takes form, where what you most long for becomes real, but only for a moment. Others believe it is alive, feeding on those who enter, leaving behind only hollow echoes. Even today, if you press your ear against the velvet door, you might hear soft sounds within. A sigh, a gasp, a voice calling your name, even if you've never been there. And if you dare to touch the handle, you may not be able to stop yourself from stepping inside. Because the velvet chamber does not just open for anyone, it opens for the one it chooses. The lovers beneath the cloister, beneath the ancient cloisters of a cathedral, where candlelight flickered over cold stone, there were tunnels no one spoke of. They were older than the church itself, built before the land was claimed by faith. The monks said they were only storage cellars, nothing more. But sometimes, at night, faint music could be heard echoing from the darkness below, and sometimes, laughter. It was in those hidden tunnels that Brother Ansel met her. He had been a devout monk, devoted to silence and prayer, untouched by temptation. But one evening, while carrying candles down to the lower halls, he saw her. A woman dressed not in plain rags, but in a gown of soft silk, pale as moonlight. She stood in the shadows, her face half hidden, her lips curved in the faintest smile. "You're not supposed to be here," Ansel whispered. "Neither are you," she replied. Her voice was warm, musical, yet heavy with something he couldn't name. He should have turned away, but she stepped closer, her scent sweet as jasmine, her eyes shining in the dim candlelight. "Will you walk with me?" she asked, and he did. Through twisting passages they walked, deeper into the tunnels, where the walls were carved with strange symbols long forgotten. There, hidden beneath the holy ground, was a chamber draped in velvet and gold. Candles burned in every corner, their flames soft and low. And there were others, men and women dressed in cloaks and masks, their faces hidden. They danced slowly, bodies close, moving not like strangers, but like lovers. Ansel froze. "This is forbidden." The woman touched his hand. "So is desire, but it lives, even here." Before he could speak, she kissed him. It was soft at first, then deeper, and with it came a rush of feeling he had never known, warmth, hunger, longing that filled his veins like fire. The chamber blurred, the sounds of soft music and the laughter wrapped around them. Hours passed, or maybe moments. When Ansel awoke, he was lying alone in the cold tunnels. The silk-draped chamber was gone. Only the faint scent of jasmine remained. He told himself it was a dream, but the next night he heard the music again. He returned, and again she was waiting. Night after night he descended into the tunnels. He kissed her, held her, lost himself in her arms, but he never learned her name. She never told him who she was or why she was there. Until one night he asked, "Who are you?" he whispered. She smiled sadly. "I was once like you, bound by vows, but I chose the tunnels, I chose desire, and now I can never leave." Her touch was colder than before. Her eyes shone with something deeper than sorrow. Ansel felt fear then, but it was too late. The walls of the chamber seemed to close around him. The music grew louder, echoing like a heartbeat, and when dawn came, the other monks noticed he was gone. They searched the cathedral from the towers to the crypt, but Brother Ansel was never seen again. Now the monks still hear faint sounds in the tunnels, sometimes music, sometimes a man's soft voice whispering in the dark. They say if you go beneath the cloisters at midnight, you might see a candle flickering where no candle should be, and if you follow the sound of the music, you'll find her waiting. But once she takes your hand, you'll never return to the surface. The Painter's Secret. In a small medieval town, hidden behind narrow streets and crooked rooftops, there lived a painter named Renard. He was known for his portraits, so lifelike, so haunting, that those who saw them felt as if the painted eyes were truly watching. Nobles travelled for miles to have their faces captured by his brush, but Renard himself was quiet, solitary, and strangely secretive. They said he painted only at night, that his studio was always locked, and that no one ever saw the models he used. One winter, a young noblewoman named Celeste came to him. She was engaged to a powerful man she did not love, and she wanted, just once, to have her beauty captured as she truly was, not as a dutiful bride-to-be. Renard agreed. She came to his studio on a moonless night. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the smell of oils and something sweeter, something she couldn't name. Canvases lined the walls, each draped with black cloth, hiding their faces. "Sit," he said softly. She sat on a velvet chair while he prepared his paints, but instead of asking her to pose, he only looked at her. His gaze was so intense it made her heart race. "Do you want me to remove my cloak?" she asked. "Yes," he whispered. "I must see you as you truly are." She hesitated, but there was something in his voice, calm, hypnotic, that made her obey. Hours passed. He painted in silence, and as he worked she felt strange. Her thoughts blurred. Her body felt light, as if the longer he painted, the more of her slipped into the canvas. At one point she thought she heard whispers, not his voice, but soft voices around the room, murmuring like shadows. When it was done, he turned the painting toward her. She gasped. It was her, but not her as she saw herself. In the painting, her eyes burned with longing, her lips slightly parted, as if about to speak a secret she'd never dare utter. She looked alive. "I say you." In a way she didn't know she could be. "Is this truly me?" she whispered. "It is the you that you hide," he replied. She couldn't look away. And then the painted lips moved, only slightly. Celeste stepped back, trembling, but Renard only smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Do not be afraid," he said. "The painting keeps what you desire most. It will never fade." The next morning, Celeste returned home, but she was changed. At night, she dreamed of the painted version of herself, dreamed of the woman in the canvas who seemed freer, wilder, more alive. She longed to be her. Days later, her fiancé found her gone. Her clothes were left behind, her room empty. Renard's studio stayed locked, but villagers swore they saw a new portrait hanging in his window, a woman with Celeste's face, her eyes full of fire, her painted hand reaching outward as if trying to escape the frame. And still the painter worked. Some say his portraits were not just images. They were pieces of the soul he captured, moments of secret desire trapped forever in oil and pigment. Those who had their likeness painted by Renard lived differently afterward. Some grew restless, some left their homes and never returned. Some stared at their portraits for hours until they began to whisper back. And those who disappeared? Perhaps they didn't truly vanish. Perhaps they simply stepped into the canvas to live the life they wished for, forever frozen in painted eternity. Now, the old studio is abandoned. But sometimes, on nights when the moon hides its face, people claim to see light glowing faintly from inside. If you press your ear to the door, you might hear the soft sound of a brush across canvas. And if you dare to peek through the window, you might see your own reflection, already being painted, the moonlit pact. In the highlands, where mist curled around jagged stones and the nights felt endless, there stood an ancient well. It was said to be older than the village itself, carved in a time when gods and mortals still spoke. The villagers called it the Wishing Well, but not with joy. They spoke the name in hushed voices, for it granted not wishes, but trades. You could ask the well for anything your heart desired, but it would always take something in return. One autumn night, a young maiden named Evelyn came to the well. She was promised to an old, cruel man who owned the land her family worked. She wanted freedom. She wanted love. The moon was full and pale, casting silver over the stones. Evelyn stood at the edge and whispered her plea. "I want him to release me. I want someone to truly see me." Her voice trembled as she dropped a silver ring into the dark water. The well was silent at first. Then the surface rippled, and from the darkness below came a voice, soft, smooth, neither man nor woman. "It can be done," it whispered. "But will you give me a memory in return?" "A memory?" she asked. "Your most cherished one, the memory of your first true happiness. Give it, and what you ask will come to pass." Evelyn hesitated. That memory was her childhood, the meadow where she played, the voice of her mother singing, but the thought of marrying a man she hated made her chest tighten with dread. "I agree," she said. The well was still. Then a single drop of water rose, glowing like a pearl. It hovered before her, and when it touched her lips, her mind grew hazy. She felt something slip away, like a soft hand releasing hers. And then she heard the cry of a raven in the distance. The very next day, her betrothed fell ill. Within a week, he released her from the promise. Not long after, she met a kind traveller passing through the village. He saw her, truly saw her, and loved her. Evelyn felt joy again. But something was missing. She couldn't remember the sound of her mother's song, couldn't remember the meadow. Her happiest memory was gone. And late at night, she sometimes heard whispers from the well, calling her name. Others heard the whispers too. A warrior came to the well, asking for victory in battle. The well agreed, but took his ability to dream. A barren woman came, asking for a child. She was granted one, but lost all memories of her own name. And still, the well waited. One winter, Evelyn returned, desperate. "Give me my memory back," she begged. "Take something else." The well rippled. "Once given, it cannot be undone. But there is one thing you can do," it murmured. "You can give me another life in your place." She stepped back in horror. The whispers grew louder. Some say she fled the village that night, unable to bear the sound of the well calling her. Others say she was found the next morning standing at its edge, staring into the dark water until she vanished. Now travellers still pass the ancient well. Some feel a pull to look into it, to whisper a wish. And if you do, you might hear that same voice rising from the depths, offering you everything you long for. but it will always ask what you're willing to give, and it will never ask twice. The Crimson Veil, in the heart of a distant city, surrounded by high stone walls and guarded gates, there was a hall known only to the most powerful and the most desperate. It was called the House of the Crimson Veil. No sign marked its door, no commoner dared speak its name. Only those who received an invitation, slipped quietly into their chambers or delivered in a sealed box of velvet, could enter. And those who did were never quite the same after. The house was unlike anything seen in daylight. Behind its doors was a world of soft music, dim lanterns and endless silk curtains that glowed faintly in the candlelight. No one ever saw the faces of the attendants. They were hidden behind crimson veils that trailed like whispers of smoke. They were not simply servants, they were said to be dreamers, women and men who had given up their own names, their own pasts, to become living embodiments of desire. They did not speak, they only moved gracefully, silently, answering the unspoken thoughts of whoever came seeking them. A nobleman once entered, burdened by a loveless marriage. He had wealth, power, everything but warmth. When he stepped inside, a veiled figure approached him without a word. She led him through the hall of mirrors, where reflections danced like ghosts, and into a chamber heavy with incense. There, she removed her veil. What he saw made him forget the world beyond those silk curtains. She was perfect, but not in the way a painter would capture, perfect in the way his own heart imagined, as if she had been shaped from his deepest longing. That night, he tasted the happiness he had never known, but when dawn came, she was gone. And when he left the house, his eyes were different. He no longer desired his wealth or his lands. He no longer spoke of his wife. He spent every night waiting for another invitation that never came. Another tale spoke of a queen who entered the house disguised, curious about the whispers she'd heard. Behind the crimson curtains, she was greeted not by a stranger, but by a figure who looked exactly like her, only freer, more alive, smiling with a wicked joy she'd never dared to feel. The queen stayed in the house for 3 nights. When she returned to her palace, she ruled with a strange calmness, but she never laughed again. Some believed the attendants of the Crimson Veil were not human at all. They were thought to be illusions made real by the house itself, shaped from the desires of those who stepped inside. What you saw, what you touched, what you tasted, none of it existed beyond those walls, but in the moment it felt more real than life. And always there was one rule. If you lifted a veil without permission, you would see what lay beneath the illusion. One man tried. When he touched the fabric and pulled it away, he did not find beauty. He found a hollow face, eyes like black mirrors reflecting his own hunger back at him. He screamed. The next morning, his body was found in the street outside the house. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. Now, the House of the Crimson Veil appears and disappears like a shadow. Some say it exists only for those who are ready to face their true desire. Others believe it is a trap that feeds on longing, taking from you the one thing you never realized you were losing. And sometimes, on silent nights, a faint red glow can be seen behind an unmarked door in the city. If you see it, will you knock, or will you keep walking, wondering forever what waits behind the veil? The bell at midnight. In a quiet monastery on the edge of the forest, there hung a bell unlike any other. It was small, blackened with age, and no one knew who had forged it. It was never used for prayer or for summoning the monks. It hung in a solitary tower, its rope hidden from sight. The monks called it the bell at midnight, because sometimes, without warning, it would ring on its own. Only once, a single, soft chime that echoed through the stone halls like a breath in the dark. And always, on the night the bell rang, someone in the monastery vanished. They said the bell didn't just call, it chose. Brother Mathieu was the first to feel it. He was young, devoted, but restless. In the stillness of the cloisters, he longed for something he couldn't name, something beyond prayers and fasting. One winter night, as snow fell silently outside, he heard it. A single chime. It was so soft, he thought at first he imagined it. But then he felt it, not just in his ears, but in his chest, in his bones, like a gentle pull. He followed the sound through the dark corridors. The others slept, unaware. The bell tower door was ajar. Inside, the air was strangely warm, though it was midwinter. Candlelight flickered where no candle should have been. And at the top of the stairs stood a figure. She was cloaked in black, her face hidden. "You heard the bell," she said, her voice a whisper that felt like silk. Brother Mathieu trembled. "Who are you?" "I am what you seek," she replied, "and what you fear." He should have fled, but her voice wrapped around him like a melody. She held out her hand. "Step beyond the vows you never truly wanted. Come with me." When he touched her fingers, the world shifted. The stone walls melted into shadows. The tower disappeared. He was standing in a garden bathed in silver light, filled with flowers that glowed faintly like stars. Music floated through the air, soft and distant. And there she stood, no longer cloaked. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, her eyes deep pools of night. She kissed him, and in that kiss was every longing he had denied himself. The next morning, the monks found his robes folded neatly in his cell. But Mathieu was gone, and he was not the last. Sometimes the bell rang for a weary abbot who had lost his faith, sometimes for a novice who dreamed of the world outside, sometimes for a pilgrim passing through who heard it in the distance and could not resist stepping closer. Each time, the same story, a single chime, a soft pull, a figure in the tower. Some believed the bell was cursed, a relic of an older faith meant to lure souls away. Others whispered it was a gift, a way out for those who secretly longed to escape their chains. But no one who followed the bell ever returned. Even now the monastery stands silent. The bell still hangs in its tower, untouched. And sometimes, at midnight, travellers camped nearby hear it. Just one soft ring. If you hear it, you'll feel it too. That strange pull, like something calling you by name. Will you cover your ears and stay where you are? Or will you follow the sound, up the stairs, into the warmth, and take the waiting hand? The silent banquet. In the heart of a crumbling castle, long abandoned by kings, there was a hall that came alive only once a year. It was called the Silent Banquet. No one knew exactly when it would happen, but on certain nights, when the moon was hidden behind clouds and the wind was still, travellers passing near the ruins would see candlelight flickering through the shattered windows, and they would hear music, soft, haunting music, drifting out into the cold night air. Those who followed the sound found the castle gates open, though by day they were sealed with heavy chains. The courtyard would be empty, but the great hall beyond glowed with hundreds of candles, long tables set with golden goblets and silver platters filled with food so rich it made the mouth water. And there were guests, men and women dressed in finery from another age, velvet, silk, jewelled masks. They sat in silence, eating and drinking, but their faces were pale, almost translucent, like reflections in water. They would always look up when someone entered, and they would smile. One autumn, a wandering minstrel named Roderick stumbled upon the banquet. He was hungry, cold, and curious. When he stepped into the hall, the guests turned their faces to him, their eyes shining softly in the candlelight. A woman in a crimson gown stood and took his hand. Her touch was cool, but strangely comforting. "You are welcome," she said, her voice little more than a breath. "Sit with us. Eat." The table was laden with food he had never seen, fruits glowing like jewels, meats fragrant with spices, goblets filled with wine dark as midnight. Roderick hesitated only a moment, then hunger won. The wine was sweeter than anything he'd tasted, the fruit melted on his tongue. As he ate, the room seemed warmer, brighter, the music grew louder, and the faces of the guests seemed less pale, more alive, and the woman in crimson never left his side. She smiled as he drank another cup, and another. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay with us forever." He didn't notice that the candles never burned lower. He didn't notice that the guests never truly spoke, only smiled and watched. When dawn came, the castle was silent again. The hall was empty, the tables bare, only the cold wind moved through the ruins. Roderick was gone. Later, travellers claimed to see him sitting among the pale guests at the next banquet, his face calm, his eyes distant, a goblet in his hand. They say the silent banquet is not a feast of the living. It is a gathering of those who could not resist the lure of the hall, souls bound to the castle, forever dining in silence, forever waiting for the next traveller to join them. If you hear music in an abandoned place, if you see candles burning where no one lives, you might be near the banquet. You might even be invited in. But remember this, once you taste the wine, once you take a seat at the table, you will never leave. You will simply wait for the next guest, and when they arrive, you will smile too. The mirror of two faces. In a forgotten corner of the kingdom, hidden in a chapel no longer blessed, there stood a mirror unlike any other. It was tall, framed in silver that shimmered faintly even in darkness. No one knew who had crafted it, but the villagers whispered that it did not reflect what was. It reflected what you most longed to see. They called it the Mirror of Two Faces. A wandering knight named Sir Aldrich came upon the chapel one stormy evening. He was weary from battles, his heart heavy with regrets. Seeking only shelter from the rain, he stepped inside. The chapel was silent, cold, but at the far end, lit by the faint glow of a single candle, stood the mirror. A strange pull drew him closer. When he looked into it, he did not see his worn armor or his tired face. He saw her, the woman he had loved and lost years ago. She was standing there, smiling softly, her eyes full of the warmth he had dreamed of every night since. "Aldrich," she whispered. He stumbled back. The mirror had no voice, yet the sound was clear. "Come to me," she said, and as he watched, the reflection shifted. The woman reached out her hand, and the glass rippled like water. He knew it was impossible. He knew it had to be a trick, but his heart ached. He stepped closer. When his fingers touched the surface, it was warm, not hard like glass, but soft like flesh. He felt her hand press back. "Step through," she whispered. "Stay with me." And in that moment he forgot the battles, the vows, the world beyond. He stepped into the mirror. When dawn came, the villagers found the chapel empty. But in the mirror's reflection there was a new figure, Sir Aldrich, standing beside the woman, smiling with the same longing he'd carried all his life. Others found the mirror too. A lonely widow came, hoping to see her dead husband. She did. He called to her from the other side and she joined him. A young girl came, yearning for a life beyond her poverty. The mirror showed her as a queen, draped in jewels, and when she touched the glass, she vanished into her imagined throne room. Every time someone stepped into the mirror, their reflection remained, but the real world lost them, and the mirror grew heavier. But not all who looked were fooled. One monk, wise and cautious, stared into the silver frame and saw two images. On the surface, the woman he secretly loved, but faintly, just behind her, was another face, pale, hollow, with black eyes staring straight through him. The monk turned away before it could speak. Now the chapel is crumbling, but the mirror still stands. Travelers say that if you dare to look, you will see the one thing your heart aches for most. But if you look too long, the mirror will ache for you in return. And when it whispers your name, you won't want to resist. The Bride in the Tower. In a remote valley shrouded in mist, there stood a solitary tower of pale stone. No village surrounded it, no road led to it. The locals called it the Tower of the Bride. They said a nobleman had built it centuries ago for the woman he loved, a woman so beautiful he feared the world would steal her away. So he locked her high within the tower, promising to visit only when the moon was full. But time is cruel. He grew restless, distracted by battles and courtly affairs. Weeks turned to months, months to years, and the bride in the tower was forgotten. She waited, alone. And in her loneliness, she whispered to the shadows. She begged the darkness to keep her company. It answered. When the nobleman finally returned, older and weary, he found the tower doors open. The bride was waiting at the top, dressed in her wedding gown, her face still radiant. But her eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep. She smiled, embraced him, and whispered, "I am never alone now." The next morning, the nobleman was found at the base of the tower, his face pale, as if all life had been drained from him. Since then, the tower has stood empty, or so it seems. But travellers tell of strange lights flickering in the highest window on moonless nights, of soft singing, like a lullaby, drifting down through the mist. And sometimes, if you draw too close, you'll see her. The bride. She appears at the window, veiled in white, her face as lovely as the day she was locked away. She beckons with a gentle hand. "Come keep me company," she whispers. Those who enter the tower never return the same. A wandering knight climbed the spiral stairs after hearing her voice. He was never seen again, but from that night on, there were two figures at the window. A young maiden entered, hoping to find the beauty that was promised in the tales. She vanished, but the soft singing grew louder after she saw name. And some say the bride is no longer alone. Each soul she lures stays with her, trapped in the silence of the tower. If you listen closely on still nights, you can hear faint footsteps circling the stairs, again and again, as if they are always climbing, never reaching the top. The mist thickens around the tower, hiding it from view most of the time. But sometimes, just sometimes, it appears. If you see the pale stone rising in the distance, if you glimpse the faint glow of a candle in the highest window, don't look too long, because the bride will see you, and once her eyes meet yours, you will hear her voice in your dreams, soft, sweet, endless. Come keep me company. The candle that never burns out. In a small monastery hidden deep within the woods, there was a single candle that had burned for as long as anyone could remember. It stood in the centre of a dark chapel, its flame steady and warm, never growing smaller, never melting the wax. The monks called it the eternal flame. They believed it was holy, a gift from heaven, a sign that their prayers were heard, but not all believed it was blessed. Some whispered that it was older than the monastery itself, that it was not a flame of light, but a flame of hunger. It was said that if you gazed into the candle for too long, you would begin to see things that were not there. A novice monk named Elias learned this too late. He was quiet, humble, but curious. He wondered why the candle never dimmed, why no one was allowed to touch it. One night, while the others slept, Elias crept into the chapel alone. He stared into the golden flame. At first it was only light, soft, warm, but then it shifted. He saw a face within the fire, a woman's face, smiling at him. Her voice echoed in his mind. "You are lonely. I can give you what you seek." Elias trembled. What are you?" "I am what burns for you," she whispered. The flame grew brighter, and now he saw more, visions of a life beyond the cold stone walls, laughter, touch, love he had never known. "All you must do," the voice said, "is give me your shadow." "My shadow?" "The part of you that follows you, the part you do not see. Give it to me, and you will never be alone again." Elias hesitated, but the longing in his chest was too great. "Yes," he whispered. The flame flickered high, and for an instant the chapel was filled with a warm golden glow. Then it was gone. The next morning, the monks found Elias wandering the halls, smiling faintly, his eyes empty. He said nothing. He didn't even seem to notice when they spoke his name. And when he walked in the sunlight, he cast no shadow. After that, more monks disappeared. Some were found sitting silently before the candle, their faces calm but hollow, their shadows gone. Others simply vanished, leaving only faint footprints leading toward the chapel. The eternal flame still burns, never dimming, never melting the wax. They say it does not feed on oil or air. It feeds on what you are willing to give. If you ever see a candle that never dies, do not look too long into its glow, because it will look back, and it will show you everything you've ever wanted, just long enough to make you give yourself away. The book that writes itself. In an old abbey, hidden away from the world, there was a library that few dared enter. Most of its books were harmless, histories, prayers, forgotten poetry. But on a locked shelf behind iron bars lay one book that was never meant to be opened. It was bound in dark leather, its pages edged in gold. No title marked its cover. The monks called it the Living Book, because it was said that if you opened it, the pages would not be empty. They would begin to write themselves. A young scribe named Lucien found it one night while copying manuscripts. He had heard the whispers, the warnings, but his curiosity was too strong. He unlocked the shelf and carried the strange book to his desk. When he opened it, the pages were blank. But then, words began to appear, curling across the parchment like ink bleeding from the air itself. "Lucien," it wrote. His breath caught. It was writing his name. "You are tired of silence, tired of shadows. Would you like to know what you truly desire?" Lucien's hands trembled. "What is this?" he whispered. The ink kept moving. "I am your story. I can show you what you will never say aloud. I can make it real." And before his eyes, the book began to paint scenes in words. Scenes of passion, of beauty, of life beyond the abbey walls. A woman appeared in the lines, described so vividly he could almost see her, feel her, hear her voice whispering his name. "Is this real?" Lucien asked. "It can be," the book wrote. "All you must do is write your answer." He picked up his quill. His hand moved before his mind could stop it. "Yes," he wrote. The moment the word touched the page, the room changed. The air grew warm. The woman from the words stood before him, smiling softly. She touched his cheek, and it felt real. Her warmth, her breath, her kiss. For days, Lucien stayed hidden with her. But as the days passed, the woman's smile grew strange. Her eyes darkened. The room grew colder. And when he finally begged to stop, she only whispered, "The story isn't finished yet." When the monks found the library door unlocked, Lucien was gone, but the book was open, and on the last page were new words. Another joins the story. Since then, the book waits. It writes to whoever dares to open it, whispering the one thing they long for most. It offers it freely: warmth, love, secrets, escape. But each story must end, and when it does, the book closes, and someone is gone. If you ever find a book with no title, if the pages begin to write themselves, do not read further, because the story it tells is not just words, it is a door. And once you step inside, you may never return. The music of the hollow court, deep within a forest so thick the sunlight barely touched the ground, there was a clearing no hunter dared enter. Because sometimes, on the stillest nights, music drifted from that place. Soft, lilting music played on instruments no one had ever seen. It was neither joyful nor sorrowful. It was something in between, a sound that made your chest ache with a longing you couldn't name. The villagers called it the Hollow Court. They said that once, long ago, a king built a palace in the woods. He was a man who wanted everything: wealth, power, beauty, but it was never enough. So he made a pact, no one knew with what. But from that day on, his court was filled with endless music, endless feasts, endless beauty. His guests never aged, never tired, never left, until one day the palace simply vanished. Only the clearing remained, but the music stayed. One summer evening, a young minstrel named Isolde heard the sound while travelling alone. It was soft, distant, but irresistible. She followed it through the trees, her feet moving as if the melody itself pulled her forward. When she stepped into the clearing, it was no longer empty. Before her stood a grand hall of glass and gold, glowing in the moonlight. Inside, dancers moved gracefully, their faces hidden behind jewelled masks. They turned when they saw her, and they smiled. A man in silver approached and bowed. His voice was smooth as silk. "Welcome, Isolde. We have been waiting for you." She hesitated. "How do you know my name?" "Because the music told us," he said. He offered his hand. "Will you play for us?" And somehow she already held her lute, though she didn't remember taking it out. When she began to play, the strings felt lighter than ever, her fingers moving with unnatural grace. The dancers twirled faster, the hall grew brighter. The music around her rose to join her song, weaving into hers like threads of silver. She felt alive in a way she never had before. But when the song ended, she looked up and realized the dancers had removed their masks. Their faces were pale as bone, hollow-eyed, smiling with mouths too wide. She dropped her lute, but the man in silver only stepped closer. "You played beautifully," he whispered. "Now you belong to the music." The glass walls of the hall melted into darkness. The dancers circled her. The music began again, and Isolde vanished. The next morning, travellers passing the forest heard a new melody among the hollow court's music. Softer, sadder, it was her song. Now the clearing waits for the next listener. If you ever hear music in the woods where no one should be playing, you'll feel it tug at your heart, soft and sweet. But don't follow it, because if you do, you may find the hollow court still dancing, and they will always have one more mask waiting for you. The Well of Whispered Names. On the edge of an old village, long abandoned to time, there was a well no one used. Its stones were black with age, and the water inside was said to be too deep to see the bottom. The villagers called it the Well of Whispered Names, because if you leaned close enough, you could hear voices rising from its depths. They weren't echoes, they were names, softly spoken, like a lover calling in the dark. One evening, a merchant named Thomas stopped near the well while travelling. He had heard the stories but didn't believe them. It was just a well, he thought. Curiosity made him lean over the stones. At first, he heard only the faint drip of water. Then, a whisper. It was his name. He froze. "Thomas?" It was a woman's voice, soft and sweet. "Who's there?" he called. "Someone waiting for you," the voice replied, drifting up like mist. "Don't you remember me?" He frowned. "I don't know you." "Yes, you do," the voice murmured. "Come closer." Against his better sense, he leaned further, peering into the darkness below. And there she was, a pale face floating just beneath the water's surface, smiling softly, her eyes shining with a strange light. "Take my hand," she whispered. Without thinking, he reached down. The moment his fingers touched the surface, icy hands grabbed him from below. He screamed, but the water swallowed the sound. The next morning, his cart was found by the road, his belongings untouched. but Thomas was gone. Since then, others have heard the voices. A lonely widow stopped by the well and heard her dead husband calling her name. She leaned in and vanished. A child heard her mother's voice. She followed it. She never came back. The well does not lie. It always calls with the voice of someone you long for most. It tells you what you want to hear, but it is never truly them. It is the well itself, waiting. Some say the souls of those two. Aiken remain trapped in the water, their whispers joining the others. If you listen too closely, you will hear them too, calling for someone else. And if you hear your own name, it's already too late. Now the well sits alone in the ruins of the village. Moss covers its stones, but the whispers still rise when the wind is still. If you ever pass it, never look down, never listen, because it will always know your name, and it will always be waiting. The Midnight Masquerade. In the heart of an ancient city, long after the streets emptied and the lamps went dark, there was a place where the living and the forgotten gathered. It was called the Midnight Masquerade. No one knew how to find it. It was said to appear only for those who were lost, lonely, or longing for something they could never name. One moment you'd be wandering down an empty alley, and the next you'd see it, an archway draped in black silk, glowing faintly with golden light. A faint music would drift from beyond, soft violins, slow, haunting. And if you stepped through, you'd find yourself in a ballroom unlike any other. The walls were draped in velvet, the ceiling painted with constellations that seemed to move. Candles floated in the air like stars, casting a warm, golden glow, and the dancers, they were masked. Men and women in gowns of shimmering silk, their faces hidden behind beautiful, intricate masks shaped like birds, beasts, and angels. They moved gracefully across the floor, silent except for the faint rustle of fabric and the soft, distant music. They would all stop when they saw you, and one of them would approach. A masked figure in white, their hand outstretched. "Welcome," they would whisper. "We have been waiting for you." So it was for Elena, a merchant's daughter who had wandered the city alone after running from a life she didn't want. She found the archway. She heard the music. She stepped inside. A man in a black mask took her hand and led her to the floor. They danced. And as they moved, the world outside faded. The music wrapped around her like a spell, soft and endless. The dancers swirled around them, their masks glinting in the candlelight. "You can stay here," he whispered. "Here. You will never age, never tire, never hurt again." She hesitated. "But what will I become?" He leaned close. "You will become what you already are. A dream waiting to be remembered." And with those words, she felt herself slipping, lighter and lighter, until she was no longer sure if she was dancing or floating. When dawn came, the ballroom was gone. The archway vanished, and Elena was never seen again. But on certain nights, when the moon is hidden, travellers wandering the same streets swear they can hear faint music. They say if you listen too closely, you'll feel it tugging at you, soft, sweet, impossible to resist. And if you follow it, you might see the archway draped in silk, waiting for you. But if you step inside, you will never leave. You will become one of the masked dancers, forever twirling in the endless midnight, waiting for the next lost soul to join you. The door that opens only once, at the far edge of a crumbling village, stood an ancient house no one dared enter. Its walls were cracked, its windows dark, but in the centre of the house was a single door that gleamed like polished obsidian. They called it the Once Door, because it would open for you only one time, and what lay beyond depended on what your heart truly desired. A wandering scholar named Alaric came to the village one autumn evening. He had heard the legend and laughed at it, thinking it nothing more than a story. But when he stood before the house, the air grew strangely still. The black door seemed to shimmer faintly in the fading light. He felt it calling to him. Without knocking, without thinking, he stepped closer and touched the handle. It was warm. The door swung open silently. Beyond it was not the dusty, empty room he expected. It was a library unlike any he had ever seen. Shelves stretched higher than the sky, filled with books that glowed faintly like starlight. He stepped inside, awestruck. A woman stood waiting for him, dressed in robes of deep blue, her eyes shimmering like the pages of an unwritten story. "You have questions," she said softly. "Yes," Alaric whispered. "I've spent my life seeking truth. I want to know everything, everything that has been hidden, everything lost to time." She smiled faintly. "Then you shall." She handed him a single book, its cover plain and dark. When he opened it, the pages began to move like water, and there he saw it all, the past, the future, the secrets of life and death. For a moment it was bliss. But then the knowledge kept coming, faster, heavier. Every secret, every sorrow, every horror of the world poured into his mind until he could no longer breathe, no longer think. He dropped the book, clutching his head, screaming. The woman only watched. "You wanted to know," she whispered. "Now you do." When the villagers found the house the next morning, the door was closed again, but Alaric was gone, and on the floor before the once door lay only a scrap of parchment with a single line written in his hand. Some truths are not meant to be seen. Since then, the door has remained, waiting. Some say if you stand before it, it will open to a world of beauty, your greatest wish made real. Others say it leads only to despair, showing you what you were never meant to find. But it will open only once, and once you step through, you cannot return. If you ever find a door that does not belong, a door too perfect, too dark, too quiet, do you dare to open it? Or will you keep walking, forever wondering what waited on the other side? The Garden of Sleeping Faces. Beyond the ruins of a forgotten castle lay a garden no one tended, yet it never withered. The roses there bloomed even in winter, their petals dark as wine. The trees bore fruit that glimmered faintly in the moonlight. The air was sweet, almost too sweet, like a perfume that lingered in the back of your throat. They called it the Garden of Sleeping Faces, because if you wandered too far among its paths, you would see them. Faces, dozens of them, hidden in the roses, in the vines, even in the bark of the trees, not carved, not painted. Real. One summer, a young noblewoman named Celeste ventured into the garden. She had heard the rumours, but she was curious, bold, unafraid of fairy tales. She stepped through the crumbling gate and followed the winding paths, marvelling at the flowers that glowed softly under the moon. It was beautiful, too beautiful. And then she saw him. A man standing at the centre of the garden, dressed in white, his hair dark as the roses. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes warm, kind, almost familiar. "Welcome," he said softly. She should have been startled, but his voice was like music, soft and soothing. "Who are you?" she asked. "A friend," he said. "You look so tired, Celeste. You've been carrying so much. Would you like to rest?" "How do you know my name?" she whispered. "Because I know what your heart longs for," he replied. He led her deeper into the garden, to a hidden grove filled with roses more vivid than blood. "Breathe in," he said, gently plucking one of the blooms. "Let the scent take your pain away. Let it give you peace." The fragrance was intoxicating. She felt her body grow light, her thoughts quieting. Her eyelids grew heavy. She smiled faintly. I do feel so tired." "Then sleep," he whispered, catching her as she fell. "Sleep, and never wake again." When dawn came, the villagers who dared look fro. Emma Fair saw a new face among the roses, Celeste's face, serene, eyes closed, lips curved in the faintest smile. Now the garden waits for others. Travellers who stray too close sometimes hear a voice in the wind, gentle and kind. "Come rest, just for a moment, you've been so tired." If they follow the voice, they never return. The roses bloom brighter afterward. They say the faces in the garden do not suffer, they only sleep, forever dreaming. If you ever find a place too beautiful to be real, with flowers that smell sweeter than anything you've known, do not breathe in, because once the garden has your scent, it will call to you, and you will never want to leave. The last lantern, in the centre of a forgotten road where no village stood and no travellers passed, there hung a single lantern on a crooked wooden post. It burned every night, not with fire, but with a pale silvery glow, like moonlight trapped in glass. The people who still remembered it called it the last lantern, because they said it did not guide you home. It guided you away. A wandering pilgrim named Maurin saw it one autumn night while searching for shelter. She had been walking for hours through the dark woods, her feet blistered, her heart heavy with grief she could not shake. When she saw the glow ahead, it felt like hope. She followed it. The lantern's light was soft and strange, neither warm nor cold. Beneath it stood a man in a long grey cloak. His face was hidden in shadow, but his voice was calm, almost tender. "You've come far," he said. "I have nowhere left to go," Maurin whispered. He nodded slowly. "Would you like to rest?" She hesitated. "But I have no home, no family. There is no place for me now." The man stepped closer. Though she could not see his eyes, she felt them on her, kind and unyielding. "There is always a place," he said, "beyond the path, beyond the weight you carry. All you must do is take the lantern and walk with me." His hand extended toward her. She looked up at the pale light, and for the first time in years, she felt peace. She reached out and touched the lantern. The moment her fingers brushed its glass, the world around her faded. The road, the woods, the cold night air, all gone. She found herself walking a different path, soft and endless, where the stars shone brighter than she had ever seen, and the man in grey walked beside her, silent, until both their figures melted into the darkness. The next morning, travellers who passed that way found the lantern still burning. But Marin was gone. The lantern has never gone out. It's on the lonely road, calling only to those who are tired, lost, or longing to disappear. Some say it is mercy, a light that guides weary souls to rest. Others say it is a snare, a soft trap leading you away from everything you've ever known. No one knows where the path beyond the lantern truly leads, but they say if you see it, if you hear the quiet voice waiting in the shadows, you'll feel something deep inside you stir, a strange calm, a soft, inevitable pull, and you'll know the lantern was always meant for you, because it calls only once, and when you follow, there is no coming back. And with that, the whispers of these forbidden medieval nights fall silent,